As a rabbi, I try to stay current with all of the cool and hip trends, although the fact that I just used the word hip may realize how not hip I am. And so recently I was doing some reading about a new trend on the internet called an NFT. Anyone ever heard of an NFT before? Some of you are laughing because you have heard of it. An NFT stands for a non-fungible token. And if that's an expression that sounds strange to you, I want to tell you that it still sounds very strange to me. So here, according to the Google, is what an NFT is. It is a piece of artwork stamped with a unique string of internet code and stored on a virtual ledger called a blockchain. Means nothing whatsoever to me. And so if that jargon also means nothing to you like it does to me, let me try explaining it this way. An NFT is a work of art that exists only in cyberspace and nowhere else. And it can be bought and sold only in cyberspace. There's no physical statue that you get when you buy a work of art that's an NFT. There's no painting that you get to hang in your house when you buy an NFT. You buy it, and what you get is the right to look at pixels on your computer. And if all of this sounds completely insane, then imagine my surprise when the New York Times a few weeks ago ran an article about an NFT by an artist named Beeple that sold for $69 million. Of course, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that this is not a blip, it is a trend. Let's talk about the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. Don't y'all wish you got in on the beginning of that one? The cryptocurrency Bitcoin is not made up of any actual coins. I can't go to a bank teller or to an ATM and say, please give me X number of Bitcoins. And yet, despite the fact that it is not physical, it's still real. One Bitcoin is worth 56,000 American US dollars. It hardly seems necessary to point out this morning that the boundaries between what are reality and what are real are slowly eroding from one another. And we are living in a world where what makes something real is becoming less contingent on whether it has any boundaries or whether it has real or physical manifestation. Today, what has value is if a person says it has value, not whether it has physical boundaries or not. In this week's parsha, the Har B'chukotai, we see the same tension at play, with a very strange kind of exception in the rule of the Jubilee year. By law, we read that the Jubilee year occurs once every 50 years, 7 times 7, the end of the sabbatical year, and during that year, people have the opportunity to go and reclaim their ancestral land, and the land goes back to its original owner, or it becomes essentially ownerless. That is unless you've bought a house that is in a walled city. Provided that the house is not redeemed by its owner in that original year and no one claims it, the Torah says that it becomes yours forever. Which is interesting because if that same house exists outside of a walled city in the countryside, the same law doesn't apply. Either that land gets claimed, and if it doesn't, it's owned by nobody, and you don't get to keep it. And so we're left asking this Shabbat morning, what is the difference? Why should this exception exist for a house inside of a walled city that doesn't exist for a house that is in the country? Our commentators, as much as I looked, don't really elaborate on this issue, but perhaps it's because to them the difference was quite obvious. A house in the city is a place of protection. It has a sense of boundaries and permanence. It's very hard, if you have a house in Manhattan, and nobody here has a house in Manhattan, but an apartment, to take it away. But think of land in the country. I'm sure I'm talking to a room of people here who have driven through rural Georgia before. The land can sometimes seem to go on for miles, endlessly. No boundaries. There's an openness, an infinity sometimes to what you see. The land belongs to no one. But once you give someone or something boundaries, it has more of a permanence, more staying power, more of a lasting value. Over the past number of months, really the past year and a half since the pandemic began, a great many of us have been asking questions about what is real and what is not real, especially when it comes to online experiences. Are online business meetings with clients the same as if I had flown out there and met them in person? Or are my clients going to get upset with me because I didn't go out to be there in person for the meeting? When we download a Siddur, a prayer book from the internet, which no doubt many of you at home have done this morning, we are asking ourselves, if it only exists on the computer, is it a real Siddur or is it not? And lastly, but certainly not the least, does attending religious services at home over Zoom count as coming to real religious services on Shabbat? To quote a famous song, and I won't sing it, but maybe Hannah will in the future, is this for real or is this fantasy? There are no doubt many opinions, answers to this question, and I think a large part it depends on who you ask. But also we can't take for granted that the answer to this question about what's real and what is fantasy is really a moving target. Because when the pandemic began, I would posit that most of us thought that watching services over a computer was weird, that it wasn't real. And a year and a half later, I'll speak for myself when I say I still think it's weird, and it doesn't quite seem real. And yet I know there are those of you at home who are saying, wow, not only is this real, it's totally normal, and it's wonderful, and it's very real. And I suspect whether we like it or not, that whether it's Bitcoin or NFT or anything like that, it's going to become difficult for future generations to see the boundaries between what is real and perhaps what is pseudo-real. It's going to all be real to us. And yet what our parasha does this morning, our Torah reading, is to provide a clear answer and delineation to that question. Yes, a house in a walled city and a house in the country are both real. But there is a greater sense of staying power and permanence when something has physical boundaries as opposed to something that has no boundaries at all. Take, for example, our Shabbat morning service. For those of you watching today, whether you're watching at home or whether you are watching in this sanctuary, what we are all experiencing together is very, very real. And I believe your prayers to God count whether you're doing them here in this space or whether you're doing them at home. You all just watched Hannah do a beautiful job on her Haftorah. That was real. It doesn't make a difference whether you're doing it at home or whether you're watching it here. And yet there is something more permanent, even tangible, fungible, if you will, about the experience that is different for people who are in this space. We are in this space like a walled city, a house in a walled city. We are focused in a different way than someone who may be listening to this sermon, as someone told me this week, that she does every Shabbat when she's out for a jog on Saturday morning. I'm thrilled, by the way, that you're tuning in. But this sanctuary is a space of hugs and the touch of the Torah and the physical prayer book. And even after the pandemic, no Jubilee year is going to take those things away from us in this space. They are permanent. And so I've been thinking maybe NFT should stand for something else. NFT, not full Torah. You're getting the Torah at home, but it's not quite full. It's not quite the same. As we enter into the 21st century, reality as we know it will change. But as we reflect on our parasha, let us never forget the beauty and the staying power that exists from physical spaces with physical boundaries. A $69 million NFT is no doubt beautiful, but in my humble opinion, it pales in comparison to a trip to the High Museum to go look at a Monet. In a dozen years or more, it's going to be remarkable when we all get to see Hannah on Disney Plus's version of Hamilton. But it's not going to be the same when we all go see her on Broadway, is it? NFT. May all of our Torah always be real, may it be boundaried, and may it always be full. Shabbat Shalom.